tech, as it says right there. This presentation or talk is on, it was originally on exploit kits, but who's familiar with the exploit kit like landscape right now? Are we seeing a ton of exploit kits like we were? No, they've kind of disappeared. And that was the genesis of my talk last year. My talk last year was right after I started working on it, right after RSA killed all the domain shadowing stuff, and it's kind of been on a decline. So this is picking up on that research. So exploit kits are dead, but we can still learn a lot from exploit kits from looking at the stuff that I've used over the last little bit. Not to say that I'm the best at it or that I knew a lot about it, but it's been rather fun to do in a hobby, and they pay me occasionally for it too. So we like that, or at least I like that. My kids do too. My background is I'm part of the Anomali Labs team. I do the CSO professional service as well, so I go out to client sites and do engagements and so forth to help work with professional services and threat intelligence and workflows. Before I worked at Anomali, I was a SOC analyst, or I worked in a couple SOCs, and I started to do support services as support as a threat intel hunter or a threat intelligence analyst at a major FI. So I got hooked on exploit kits back in 2010, and I've been interested in them for a very long time, and it's a lot of fun. I realized I didn't fix my slides. So I'll try not to use that word because I think that's the most said word in any presentation. When is a good time to take on or to become aware of a current or an emerging threat? This is a question out to you guys. When do you... What? Exactly. When's the worst time, or one of the worst times you can come find out? Right. So, if anybody's seen or been in this experience, this is after IR tells you that you've got a compromise, or you're showing up somewhere and they're working many incidents. The idea is, like I said, exploit kits rely on domain names or domains, IPs, registrant. They have to get the domains or the exploit kit onto the internet. So how can we take technology available to us or patterns and find ways that we can get in front of, or at least faster into, when infrastructure is standing up or becoming or hitting the internet, and that we can get mitigation in before? Another question for the audience that I didn't put in a slide, I tried to minimize my words, is how do you do your blocking or your mitigation for your enterprise or your corporate or your environment? You guys, who does IP blocks?
Typically network, security, firewall people.
Okay, no, but as practitioners, do you use IP blocking for mitigation? It depends, okay? Do you do TLD blocking on proxies and so forth? Depends. Do you do, so the idea is, I've seen anybody range from IP blocking to TLD blocking to the second level domain blocking to sub or host blocking to regex and URIs, because they cannot block, they can only detect. And so what I found is, in most cases, figuring out the way to get the most effective mitigation is not really at the exploit kit. It's at the TDS that's driving traffic and figuring that out. But there's a lot of organizations that don't have the time or resources or understanding. They're dealing with not so much the immediate gratification, but the immediate pain of, I have a compromise and I need to block something. Where can I block? And that's led to at least 3 different organizations that I've worked, or 2 different organizations that I've worked to, that they're fighting the battle way too close to home. It's too much, it's a reactive position. The idea of this talk is to try to figure out or look at both the GrandSoft exploit kit. Is anybody familiar with GrandSoft? Has anybody seen GrandSoft in their environments? It's not really a common one in the North America. I think they're they were targeting Panama last time I talked to somebody that was using Black TDS and GrandSoft. So it's not a common exploit kit, but it's one of the last remaining. RIG moved over to the IP-based stuff, and that's killing me because I can't use domain tracking for IP-based exploit kits, and you can just block the IP. But what I like is, these are my 3 favorite things, because I can use those to triangulate in on interesting things. So another thing that I like, so I think Grandsoft and Magnitude are different. Magnitude is a different kit that's basically targeting South Korea, if last time I heard. Not really an advanced kit after, so you had the fall of Angler and Neutrino and all those other ones, and then Rig was there, and Sundown peaked up, and then Grandsoft appeared back in actually September 2017, much to everybody's surprise. I'll get into that in a second. Well, to talk about technologies. So with the domain name, when you have new domain registrations, there's a couple different elements that you can track or that show up with that. You've got to have a domain name, you've got to use a name server, and you get an IP address. We have one of our services that does new domain registrations or look for typo squatting. I exploit that quite a bit because it's fun to go and look at what the bad guys are standing up, and it's led to this talk. Second part is, who likes GDPR? I like GDPR in some ways, but not when it comes to whois records. So they're really killing me on making it so that the data available in whois is not as easy to pivot off of, because some TLDs just don't give up whois anymore. They limit that, and others and providers like to limit that further. But in whois records, there's a couple of elements that show up as well: domain, registrant information, and then name servers. And then passive DNS, another favorite, has another set. So all of these technologies have domains, IP addresses, name servers, and then subdomains. And the idea, or what I grew up playing with Splunk and doing ArcSight and doing that stuff, so I like patterns. That got me a job. Figuring out how to link these three things together on shared information, I can start to at least extrapolate, I think, patterns that allow me to track down different things, such as exploit kits and potentially malware in the future. Or currently, I'm still testing that, and we'll get into that in a second. But there's some overlap in here that leads to allowing better research. Now, Grandsoft. So apparently it was active 2012, 2013. I don't remember seeing Grandsoft. I remember Fiesta Kit and Black Hole around that time. And that might have been, I just didn't have eyes on in the org that I was working on. In September of 2017, Caffeine posted that he saw Grandsoft again and had him familiar with it. It was an awesome minion picture on the what when it showed up. Caffeine is the guy. He tracks everything. It is active to this day. I haven't pulled domains this morning, but they were registering. They registered two new second level domains on the 16th and 17th, and they are still actively, they're getting traffic from Black TDS and some other TDSs, so they are still active and present. In the course of the last year, tracking them, I found that, and I'll caveat, or I'll add this, this is easy mode. They stayed on pretty much 3 IP addresses for an entire year. They use the same name servers on the same IP addresses, and they host the subdomains on the IP addresses. So their virtual host basically is a one-stop shop for this kit, and all you got to do is look at the IP address and watch those things change. So they made it very easy, but surprisingly enough, it looks like they're very effective. And I'll show the slide in a second when it comes to the counts of the activity. I can't remember what I was going to put. All right. So what I've done is looking at the activity of the past year. I was trying to understand why, I'll go back to this one. Why do you think an actor would move from IP address or from virtual host and different hosters entirely? You think, and switch name servers and domains? What would cause, or what do you think that would motivate that change or that migration? Anybody? Right. So looking at the data, there's good reason for, there's exploit kits, Angler or Neutrino would do you would have one URL, like each and every serve would have one, it was a one-time use. I don't think Grandsoft is terribly advanced. The traffic to get to them might be advanced. So at first I thought they were avoiding detection, but they stay on the same IP address for months at a time, and they have overlap as they transition between IP addresses. Now they've changed up the ways that they register domains too. But it's interesting to look at history over time, or what I have history for, to see where the domains showed up, not geographically, because it's all in Russia, but how the pattern looks as they register new domains and they use new name servers. So this is a Maltego graph. In December of 2017, they came up into September, but I don't have registration data or registrant data for the domains. They use XYZ is their favorite one to serve up the exploit kit. Then they have TK, GQ, and CF, I believe. So the TK, CF, and GQ, I don't have visibility onto the registration, but I can see a little bit of the XYZ. So in December of 2017, they have 2 domains and they use 2 name servers. The next month, they started to get a little bit more active. Oh, in December, they also they had 144 subdomains that were serving up the exploit kit. In February, they disappeared in January for a little bit and then showed up in February. They were using 10 domains. I think they jumped up to 300 different URL or different subdomains that were served. And they're still using they're using a different set of name servers to register their domains. In March, they expand a little bit more. March, they used they registered 26 domains and ended up serving, I think they had 1,616 actual uses of subdomains. So their traffic exploded in March. And then it started to move as they added more, or they kept adding domains and shifting domain servers. And we go through as they keep moving. So these groups, December is a weird outlier as it's not attached to pretty much anything, but they started to have overlap with the large things being email addresses that they use. One was it was an admin support. It was a very odd, let's string a bunch of numbers together at p.33, which I believe is a proton mail email. So it's one of those it should be anonymous, but if you use it to register all of your malicious stuff or half of it, it's not very anonymous. Or we don't really care about the attribution other than I can track with it. And then the second one was when they move over to an abuse.support, which is, again, not very helpful in itself, but combine that with name servers and how they register the domains on the same name servers, it was really easy to start to connect the dots, literally, between what the domains were showing up on. So September, we get a little bit more. So I had visibility on 82 of the domains that they used, or the domains that they registered. In reality, they had what I found was they had 335 domains that they used. Generally, the name servers that they were registering the other one, or the other 300, or the 250. I couldn't track what registration information they used or the name servers. I wish I did. And I started to enrich with passive DNS in here so I could start to pull up the subdomains. And if you see the squares, sorry, the graph is the squares are where Maltegos decided to be very helpful and start to collapse into collections. So I was going to keep going, and then I realized I was going to have a bunch of squares that were 4, and each square would have 100 or 200 domains in it, or subdomains, and it wasn't going to be as useful. So they were fairly prolific. And here's the time, or the domains over time, or count over time. So it was, strangely enough, he showed up, let me see if I can find the pointer. Which button's the pointer? Oh, okay. So in September, they started serving they had the one domain, which was a strange Project X that is kind of followed on the domains, but it hasn't been as active. And then in November, and then December is where I start to get the registrant information, and you can see where it spikes up to the 1,600 subdomains. Now, the activity is interesting because it looks like they moved around some infrastructure that I didn't know that I need to dig in after the talk. They were using Google hosting at one point and apparently DoD at another point. So that was very interesting to have 20 dots show up in the the Maltego graph and then look at passive DNS and actually see exploit kit hosting on it. Here's another view. So this is just the spread of domains. Same graph, just plotted on different IP addresses. So you can see where they move from the 62 dot over to the 185. And I can't remember what the first host or the first hoster is, but the second one is a Russian one. Excuse me. Like I said, easy mode. They basically, all I had to do was jump into passive DNS, pull down the domains, and start to share that or to look at it, and then throw those into threat stream for the trusted circle. How many have used investigations in threat stream? I'm not trying to. So I had a fun investigation that I've been tracking Grandsoft with, and I thought I was pretty proud. 3,745 domains until I ran through the data again and realized that I missed 2,000 domains that they had hosted on. So I've now blown up an investigation. We're trying to test the investigation feature, and I'm excited to see what the new investigation feature will use and how I can visualize and graph this in the future. But it's been interesting to watch. As they stay active on 3 domains or 3 IPs, but they use a lot of domains and they'll continue to move. So I was looking at this and thinking, okay, if this is pretty easy, I can script this out, generate or pull in IOCs. What would be something else that I could look at and try to use the name servers, the domains, and the subdomains, or the name servers, domains, and the registrant email? Who's familiar with Gozi or ursnif? Or Snifula or Votrak NeverQuest, or there's a whole bunch. So hard mode was ISFB is another one. So this is a crazy information stealer that's been around for quite a while. When I started in 2010, I had heard about Gozi from a friend that was saying that I think version 1 was doing clear text credential stealing. So when it would steal your information, you knew that you had a Gozi infection because you would see a stream of clear text flying out of your hill. So it was rather fun to watch a Gozi compromise and then a Zeus compromise, because what they would do is the one would steal the other, and they would sit there and just amplify, and they'll just continue to share or ship back what the other one would ship back. It does not sound fun. It sounds fun to watch as a network, but I don't. But another story was within 15 minutes of a Gozi compromise, and this was recently, they had activity on the account that the person who was compromised from another location. So these guys are serious. They're in the money, or they're in for fraud, and to be able to monetize the stuff, it's used by a bunch of groups or multiple people. And it's as much fun or as joking as I am about this is serious, and it's one of those, like, it's a very present threat. Challenges with Gozi as I started to dig into, and again, I apologize for the amount of text. If you guys want to read that, you can. Challenges with Gozi is it's used by multiple teams. They are multiple groups. I'm not into attribution, but it's interesting to see how the campaigns differ. And this one I'll talk about 2 campaigns that I was looking at, if I can keep my voice. I blame you, Nicholas. Meetings before you present. This is what I'm digging into is the domains that were serving up the binary. Now I found as I started to dig into this, sometimes this delivery mechanism, so I'll explain, it's an email that contains a macro-enabled Word document. That Word document executes PowerShell, and Microsoft did a great write-up on a pair of the domains that they found that I had looked at, or I was going to stumble across had I not been distracted by work. It happens, I guess, that day job, paying bills, it's good. What it does is they deliver the macro-enabled Word document, that executes PowerShell, connects back to a domain that they have and then it pulls down a binary. Now people have talked about they see Gozi or sniff when it comes down, or emotet or trickbot. And I only looked at the Gozi side or more of the domains because the domain name server and registrant email. So like I said, multiple groups use it. Just looking at a couple of the campaigns. So has anybody seen bookingcabaret.org? Or .net or .com? Again. So somebody pointed me out this in early August or middle of August, and I decided to look into it. Bookingcabaret.org has anybody heard of cabaret or cabaret? I don't know how to pronounce it. It's apparently a vacation spot in Puerto Rico. And if you search bookingcabaret.org or .com, the first link in Google is booking.com and it's cabaret locations. Is there relation to what they were sending out? I don't know. I haven't dug into the lures that they were using. But it was interesting to me that if you look at the differences, you have .org that's hosted at these 184 and 50s. Anybody an IP address or geo are familiar with GoDaddy? So these top ones are all GoDaddy. And then when you add a subdomain, it switches over to 95, which shows up in Russia. Has anybody experienced domain shadowing or domain shadowing-like activity? How does domain shadowing work? Not to put you on the spot, to put you on the spot.
Basically making subdomains off of a legitimate domain.
Right, so where does that legitimate...
As the legitimate server to then be able to create your own subdomains off of that legitimate.
Right, so they compromise the registrant account, leave the second level or the domain where it is. Generally it's parked on GoDaddy, potentially. That's where a lot of them were. And then they'll spin up the subdomains on other places. How do most people's reputation work?
Based on your .gov.
Okay. Or the second level and where it's registered and where it's living at. So when it came to reputation, it seemed like we're analysts, who are also reputation analyzers, were like, I see this, it looks like it lives on GoDaddy, well, I'm not going to pay it because it looks like a legit domain, no matter that it's serving, it failed that sniff test or something. So what I found was, I thought it was rather interesting that they kept the .org, or that second level in GoDaddy, but they had the subdomains over there. This was serving up the Ordine, what looked like Ordine lures, so there's the Ordine, and then status. This is the .net, .com. Interestingly enough, the .orgs were only on GoDaddy, and then they had the second, or the subdomains somewhere else. These are all on malicious hosters. So they started in GoDaddy, but they moved it over so that they had everything in that. So the orgs, and this is just a breakdown. GoDaddy, the 50 dot, it's good, harmless. I think it's scored as 0 or something. And then you look at the Russian one. So that, to me, struck as interesting as I did a passive DNS lookup of the Booking Cabaret. Some information, and this is what I ran into a challenge with that I couldn't use based on name server and email registrant. It's GoDaddy. GoDaddy has done a great favor, or they switched over to Whois so they can be GDPR compliant. But thankfully, sometimes they give us the name servers can be helpful, but in this case it wasn't, and I had to rely on passive DNS to go in and figure out where the hoster was, and then start to look at or pivot off of that into the information where I could see where the binary was served up. Again, lots of text. So that's the first camp. Excuse me. This is the second one, terminal output. Give me a second. I really have been talking too much. Can you mute for a second? Maybe it's stage jitters. Who knows? I don't know. Stage. Yeah, please. I'll just take one. This one.
I have a question here while you're looking.
Yeah.
So I'm an assistant sergeant in Gozi. Is your main objective to track the attacker? Are you trying to protect customers in this point? Like, what was your objective as you're tracking this? To kind of come in and side.
No, that's fine. No, that's a good question. So the idea is, this is what I like to do for fun when I'm not doing photography or other stuff. But I think it's useful because I found a lot of organizations would do regex and rely on IDS and different things. But I wanted to move that temporal advantage to, as soon as we can we identify a registered domain, that I can get it out to the community or get it to the premium or labs premium so that you guys could put in blocks. Now, depending on the org, I don't know exactly how people are blocking, which is why I asked who's relying on IPs, domains, so that if you can I prefer to block at the TDS because then you don't have to worry. So TDS jargon, who knows what a TDS is? Traffic direction system. How long, are you familiar with how that plays into the exploit ecosystem? They direct traffic to your exploit kits. So if you can knock out a TDS, you don't have to deal with any of the exploit kits generally that they said, or that particular one feed to. Black TDS is one. That's how I found this one. It was much harder to knock out Black TDS, or I thought it was much easier because it was like 3 domains at the time that I could see. But Grandsoft was a little bit more prolific from a domain perspective. And just figuring out how to get the best things. If I can't see telemetry and give you URLs, and I can't look at the regex, or if I did look at the regex, and that was one of the ideas. Anybody heard of Fallout Exploit Kit? Anybody looked at the URI patterns for Fallout? It's a mess. The conversations I've had, or I've seen, they can't put a regex around it because they randomize word dictionaries all over the place, and they've literally made it so it's almost impossible to do a regex for. So if we can find the domains as they're registered, and I can give you guys the second level domains, and you block them at the second level, you don't have to deal with the exploit kit at the subdomain level. So that's the purpose of this. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
At least for this one, I know it's not uniform across the board, but you're saying that it's usually 3 IP addresses. It seems like a no-brainer to block it.
Again, yeah, absolutely. And that's the part that I thought was pretty amazing as I dug into this, like it's staying on one IP address for this much.
Would you know, I mean, that seems really, for lack of a better word, dumb. I mean, why would you, I can just block 3, it's like a hosting, provider, like why would I just block those 3 IP addresses if it's not going to, like most people wouldn't do this for like.
Right. And I don't know when it comes to like home pro. Man, my throat's killing me. I agree. I don't know why people, I think that he's having success, or they're having success. So they're not moving. They're not feeling the pain. Fiesta Kit was one of my favorite ones early on. They didn't change. I don't know what they were doing until it happened, but sometimes these kits don't change and they stay or they're not sophisticated. The motivation, if they're still making money, is he still getting traffic, or they're still getting traffic? And then from a blocking perspective, I don't know. I haven't actually contacted an ISP to see if they would block those to prevent homeowners or home people or non-business. But from an enterprise perspective, if you can block at a TDS level, or if you can block at an IP level, whatever keeps you as far away from that threat as possible is the most optimal way. But people or friends that I've talked with before and after I joined Anomali struggle with different levels of mitigation. If they can only do regex max and post-compromise cleanup, that's where they're at. If they can do the IP addresses and do the mitigation prior, it seems like it's a mixed bag across the org, or across the world, or the different industries. But Yeah, that was one of those, like, why can't we block this earlier on? And some people just aren't aware of it, and since the landscape has changed so much, it's interesting. I think Fallout, excuse me, I don't know where Fallout Kid is showing up at, but it sounds like it's trying to come back into the mainstream of maybe America, but everybody else, yeah.
Follow that random IP generation. I know, like, talking back to like Black Hole,
Yeah.
1 and 2, where they had that random built in, were they maintaining expo kits putting in static IP, or were they random generation?
So like the URI stuff. So they've been in the one that I remember. I don't know if anybody saw or ran into NicePack. It was I think 2012. Try Googling NicePack and see if you can find anything on the exploit kit. You'll find backpacks and everything else. That was fascinating because the emerging threats community was cranking out signatures as fast as they could to try to match it. And he was changing, or the actor was changing the signature within an hour of the new signature generated. He may or may not have been on that list. So it's interesting to see what open sharing communities can be exploited. But that was interesting to watch. I think they've learned a lot in a number of years on how to go in and try to evade. And once again, it shows that we need to mature the detection and the mitigation capabilities. If we're relying on regex, that's awesome. But has anybody spent months working in regex? Do you dream in regex or have nightmares after? That's what my experience was. So I think they've learned a lot through researchers poking at it and beginner or novices starting to do and deciding to write blogs on different things and just getting it out on Twitter. And they want to make money. So they're making it more and more difficult. Any other questions before we get back to Gozi? And I think I have my voice. How are we doing on time? Good, cool. So this is another campaign with Gozi around the same time, or Sniff at the time. Again, small text. Anybody see a pattern that shows up amongst the data that I've got up here? Yeah, so they use CS Now, or CS and now.cn for everything. Now this set of name servers are interesting because that led into an entirely different mess related to the same thing that I still don't have, I don't have a very good understanding of it because it ends up, these are all related to a botnet or a couple of them. But it's an interesting delivery as I can go in and look at as I started to pull, or obviously kicked in on contact, and then everybody else uses one or two or three of this DNS pod. Now, DNS pod, I found out, was kind of a mess when it comes to shady activity, and it did, so breaking it much more readable for you guys, just common information. I think, so I saw delivery, or what ended up being delivery URLs, and then I was told that the Saratopola was command and control. So digging into the name server and the registrant email for key, because those had commonality. This is August at DNS Pod. 16,000 domains. Maltego basically shut down my computer and then died because it had 31,000 links between the domains. It's a mess. There's a lot of stuff that's being hosted. That registrar, the host, they're being abused by numerous groups, by the typo squatting and the fraud and so forth that I saw. So that's kind of hard to whittle down. This is just the CS at now.cn. And as I found, there's there's some banking typo squatting. I think they targeted, I remember a few different banks that showed up in these. But it's still a big mess. Like, I think that was 300 domains that they registered in just the month and a half that I was looking at, or that I went back for this. But if I add name server, the constrained by name server and email, I'm down to less than 100 domains. And those turn out to be these. Anybody watch the keynote where Hugh went over the graph? It was very quick, but he talked about, or this condizer.com showed up in the graph that they pivoted off of. So that was rather fun. When I started looking at this, it was back in the Tappertony and the different areas. So I can quickly narrow down, or using the name servers in the email register, and I can start to look at the different domains. I started to go through everything on the list, and it's pretty much all bad for various reasons. But I can start to now look at, the point is to take the power, or to use name servers and registrant email, or figure out how I can start to get or find the domains when they're being registered, and either add them as suspicious, or if they match a certain pattern, I can go in and validate that I can get those into the platform sooner. And if I can do that, and you guys have access to this as well, you guys can start to get ahead of the threats by using, or at least getting ahead of finding something that can get you a little closer to blocking or mitigating the threats. Yeah.
The domains, we find that they're mostly entirely attacker controlled. Do you think they were taking over good sides of the bad actor and that kind of thing?
So that's a good question, and that's where I thought it smelled like domain shadowing at first, where they compromise the registrant account and they move all that stuff. But it would seem like when everything on the list is showing up as bad and it's being registered as out or in China or whatever, and then moving over to Russia and bouncing through Russia and Romania and Ukraine, that seemed, and it was all related to one malware delivery or some sort of fraud. And as I started to see customer domains that were being mimicked as like phishing email, like this seems like it's mostly bad. Again, I'm not an attribution person, but it's one of those, like, if it shows up with this combination of name server and registrant, I'm going to say it's mostly, or it's guilty until proven innocent. And I'd rather reduce the risk by just making it so that I don't touch them. Yeah. Any other questions? Cool. So part of and this is, I believe, the last slide I have. So part of the part that I found interesting is keying off of using the domains and then jumping into stuff that people had found and harvested. They started to use this TKN thing with the Microsoft blog post that they posted on the very localized attack, I believe around this area or a little bit to the east. They were using the SOHO and then a digit and then the .tkn to serve up the malicious, or to serve the binary from the malicious Word document. But they were using flux and test in this similar URI structure to deliver the binaries, or the payload for or after the PowerShell command. So in time, I'll be able to go and link and build more graphs to try to pull this stuff in. But it's interesting. And then as well, and I didn't plot it, one of the IP addresses that I found, or one of the domains that I found, which was related to the Saratopola, is related to the FastFlux botnet, Fluxy. And I went from when it first got registered to start looking at it in passive DNS, and I think I saw it go from a couple hundred IP addresses that are on to a couple thousand to 26,000, and my browser started to slow down and realized that this is either something bad. It might have been a researcher trying to enumerate hosts with a wildcard DNS that they might have used, or that the bad guys used, or it might be related to a botnet. But that was going to be way too busy to plot, and I was having trouble downloading the JSON. So maybe that'll be next year's talk, is to look at the different delivery things. Or the C2s and so forth. Okay, questions? Anything? Yeah.
Just outside of the ones that you mentioned today, what are some of the, like a quick rundown of other exploit kits that have been active in the last week? Some of jot down, like Fiesta's and ones.
So Fiesta's old. That was a fun one. I think that disappeared. The ones that I'm aware of now, and there's great research that's out there. If you have access to the platform, we're consuming some of the stuff into threat bulletins. But there's Fallout Kit is the newest one that I know of. Rig is still very active. Magnitude, Sundown, and it's a couple different variations as well. And Grandsoft. I think Grandsoft and Magnitude are the lower sophistication ones, but once again, for the most part, other than Fallout Kit, most of the stuff isn't targeted at the U.S. Traffic really did disappear, and they did it right in time for my Detect Talk last year. So, do you have any other questions?
What's predicted in terms of the future of exploitation situation? When you see the end of those with this and stuff, it's not something like buying
I wish I don't have a good answer. To me, I like the relationships and looking at the refers. Focusing on exploit kits is important because that's where it delivers the malware. If what is old becomes new again, and they become popular, we've got a couple different problems. They've fixed a lot of the OS problems and the different things that they were exploiting. But to me, if I can find that traffic direction system that is routing or doing the traffic. Now, sometimes there's a couple of campaigns now that will route to like advertisements or not so much, or the Diet Coke of evil on the internet, but not exploit kits, like just different stuff or malvertising. But finding the route and blocking those will save you so much time and headache, and figuring out how to get what is the best mitigating control for your environment and making it so that you can increase the distance between you and whatever is going. Now, if you have the time and patience or a curious analyst, let them loose on proxy logs. It's great to find out stuff, or PCAP or something. Hey there, anything else?
Ransomware versus exploit kits.
I don't. So that's an interesting one. I don't have a good answer for you. I think So I haven't honestly haven't paid attention so much to the deliver or what the payloads are. I've been more interested in trying to find the source of that. I know that I saw, or when I was actively watching telemetry and defending an organization, it was interesting to watch as the payloads were much more sneaky at the beginning. They were dropping the the banking trojans and different stuff, and then fake AV started to show up, and then fake AV moved over to ransomware. And the change has been going from, I'm going to sit in the background and steal a whole bunch of information and not let you know, to be in your face and charging you $90 to clean up this fake or this compromise, to holding your system ransom. In the recent years, I don't know, or the ransomware being dropped, I think Grand Crab has showed up a couple different times, and it's just, everybody's in it to make money. The people that are sourcing the domains to the exploit kit writers to the payload are the people that are dropping the stuff. So I can't tell you what's going forward other than, yeah, go.
The exploit kit versus ransomware, you're talking, an exploit kit is just the delivery mechanism for the payload.
Yeah, I was just saying in terms of estimated emphasis. So if it's a criminal enterprise, or people want more towards investing in utilizing this.
I mean,
What it basically might allude to why they're coming.
I just think I think phishing has become just the easiest way. If people, if I can send your organization 10 emails and one of you clicks on it, then that's better than trying to get people to go to your compromised websites to have an exploit potentially work or not work with you. And I think another reason why exploit gets kind of died is because Adobe, Java, all these things are become in the last 7 years. I mean, exploit kits were the biggest thing, and it's because things weren't patched, things weren't updated. And whenever everyone found out, hey, if we just update our software, then none of this stuff really works, and it doesn't matter. So when people update their software, it became well, if people are updating the software, what's another way that I can get a Trojan or get your credentials?
right, social engineering.
That's the biggest thing now.
Yeah, they made great strides in browser and plugin stuff and OS hardening, so it's been a huge part.
help me get down to the bottom of this, and you know, how aggressive did you want to be in trying to find out who's behind it, or what other domains? So as an example, you mentioned a lot of the free TLDs, GQ, ML, et cetera, TK. You know, I've seen this stuff in the past, and you know, I haven't seen it to your scope, of course, of like a few domains, and you've seen hundreds, let's say. If you came to one of these TLDs and said, hey, I have 300 possibly malicious domains, can we talk about this, that kind of thing, let's hear what's going on. Have you attempted to approach them, or has anybody in your organization tried to do the same thing, and you know, have you had any success in the past?
I haven't approached. Unfortunately, I was trained early, like approach a compromised website and get threatened with lawsuits. So that's something I can definitely incorporate. I know XYZ is extremely respondent on Twitter on like, you've got malicious domains, we can help you take that down. I haven't reached out to the other ones. If anything, I would start from an observation of, please give me your registrant information so I can start to see who's spinning up new domains in your orgs, and hopefully work something out. Maybe I can at the same time to figure out if we can get more in and start to track. But this has definitely been more of a side thing, keep my sanity and wits about me so I can do some research and then try to get it into people's hands. I've had some pointers talking to people or different researchers about this. I tried to talk to the people that knew more about Gozi or Sniff. And basically they told me that I need to get with either an offensive security person that can help me understand what they're doing in an actor level by attacking them or compromising them, or I need to get very good at reversing and track the campaigns for another like 6 months, and I can start to untangle that very messy web. But for the most part, this is just, the idea is getting the data that I have into the platform and getting into the hands that people can actually protect and defend the organizations they're at. My story is my mom is a phenomenal doctor, but she is terrifying on a computer when it comes to email and clicking links. She's done much better in the more recent years, but we'd go through about 5 netbooks a year, or my stepdad would keep buying her netbooks because it was just too hard to do that. She had I think it was a Juno email that she may still have active. So she's there, and if I can put this in the hands of people that can get active out there or can help keep my mom safe on the internet, then I'm going to do what I can to do that, as well as just make it so I can get as many domains out to you guys as possible so you guys can do the active the mitigation or the retrospective searches or whatever how you can operationalize this information into your environments. Anything else? Thanks guys for coming to the last talk of the day. You guys are awesome.